Just a few minutes. I need to take this call, Grant said as we stood at a home goods checkout in Madison. I was unloading drinking glasses, kitchen towels, and the table lamp he had chosen for our living room. Nothing felt unusual, so when he lifted his phone and headed toward the front doors, I barely looked up. Weekend calls were common with his job, and I was used to waiting. I paid, loaded the bags, and realized I could not see him outside. I checked my phone, expecting a message, but there was nothing. As I pushed toward the exit, Dennis Rourke, a shift supervisor, stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Ma'am, I think you should come with me," he said, glancing toward the employee hallway. I assumed something was wrong with my payment and asked, "Is there a problem with my receipt?" Dennis did not answer, and his expression stopped me from asking again. Inside a small office, Dennis showed me what happened after Grant left the register. My husband had not gone outside. He had entered an employee-only corridor and stopped beside a dark blonde woman wearing a vendor badge. She caught his wrist. He leaned closer, and then they hugged with the familiarity of people who had done it before. There was no kiss, but nothing about them felt accidental. Dennis kept his voice low. "This isn't the first time I've seen them meet back there." I walked into the parking lot and found Grant waiting calmly beside our SUV. He slipped his phone into his pocket, smiled, and said, "Sorry. That took longer than I thought. Did you get the towels I liked?" I looked at the man who had entered a hallway he had no reason to use and met a woman he had never mentioned. I did not ask who she was because I knew only what I had seen, and I would not let him explain before I understood the rest. I opened the passenger door and said, "Let's go home." On the drive home, Grant talked about dinner, the weather, and a coworker who had been getting on his nerves, as if the last 10 minutes had meant nothing. I answered when I had to, because the footage had shown me a woman, an embrace, and one lie about a phone call, but not the full shape of whatever was happening. I did not want to ask a question he could answer too easily before I knew what I was really looking for. So I let him keep talking while he remained unaware that anything had changed. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I had decided on one thing. I would not confront him with half a truth. That night, I noticed where his phone went. For years, Grant had left it on the kitchen counter while he showered, beside his plate during dinner, or charging openly on the nightstand. Now he placed it face down through dinner, carried it into the bathroom, and slid it into the drawer beside the bed before turning off the lamp. I never touched it, guessed at a password, or tried to force open something that was not mine to access. I simply started noticing the things that had been easy to ignore when I trusted every explanation. The pattern formed slowly, then all at once. Thursday nights appeared first, usually wrapped in the same excuse: a contractor meeting, a damage review, or dinner with someone connected to a claim. Every few weeks, there was also a Tuesday when he came home late, and the next morning he always filled the SUV with gas, even though the places he named were never far enough away to explain it. One evening, he looked across the table and asked, "You've been quiet lately." And I answered, "Just tired," because that was easier than giving him anything to prepare for. He accepted it immediately, glanced back at his phone, and never looked at me closely enough to see that I had started paying attention. The next piece of evidence did not come from following Grant or touching his phone. It arrived in an ordinary delivery email sent to the family shopping account I still used. The order included a floor lamp, 2 counter stools, and a new set of sheets. But the delivery address was not our house, and it was not Grant's office. His name appeared on the order beside an apartment number across town, and I sat staring at that address because the secret finally had a place attached to it. That night, I asked casually, "Did you order furniture for the office?" And Grant answered, without hesitation, that his company was replacing a few things in the reception area. I did not correct him. Even though the email clearly listed an apartment, After that, I went back through the joint statements I already had every right to see, looking only at transactions tied to accounts we both used. Small purchases began forming a picture I had never noticed before: a coffee maker, bath towels, 2 sets of mugs, kitchen utensils, and a blanket bought on different dates. None of those charges would have meant anything alone, but several of them landed just before or after the same Thursday nights when Grant claimed work had kept him late. I saved the receipts, wrote down the dates, and resisted the urge to drive to the address myself. For the first time, I understood that I was not looking at one careless lie, but at a life being furnished piece by piece. I called Kara Winslow, a family law attorney in Wisconsin, and told her, "I think my husband has another home, and I need to know what I can legally do before he knows I found it." Kara did not tell me to confront him, and she did not promise that infidelity alone would decide everything in my favor. She gave me clear limits instead. Do not guess passwords. Do not track his phone. Do not enter accounts that were not mine. And do not turn suspicion into accusations before the facts were documented. I listened because the apartment had changed the question in front of me. I was no longer trying to make Grant confess to an affair. I needed to know who lived there, who was paying for it, and how much of our marriage had already been moved inside. Through the records Kara and I could review, I learned the name of the woman from the store, Mallory Keene. She worked as a sales representative for an appliance company, which explained her vendor badge and why she entered the employee area. What it did not explain was why Grant had lied about taking a phone call and slipped into that hallway to meet her. Another purchase confirmation landed in our family email, this time for a coffee maker being delivered to the apartment across town. Grant had added one gift message beneath the order: "Soon we won't have to keep leaving separately." That sentence changed the shape of everything because it meant Mallory was not someone Grant met only when he could steal an hour or invent a late meeting. He had promised her a future, and less than a week later, he sat across from me in our kitchen and started talking about buying an RV someday. He described the places we could visit, the weeks we might spend on the road, and how much easier life would feel once we owned less. I listened while the same man who promised another woman they would soon stop leaving separately planned a future with me, as if both promises could survive. 2 futures. 2 women. 1 husband. And no version of his story that could make them both true. Kara warned me not to assume Grant was simply choosing between us, because the evidence did not prove that yet. It proved only that he was making promises in 2 directions, while keeping each of us from seeing everything. I kept saving only what I had a legal right to access, and I began looking differently at the things Grant had encouraged me to replace around our house. A lamp. Kitchenware. Small choices I once thought were about improving our home now looked uncomfortably familiar beside the purchases going into that apartment. I could not yet prove he was copying our life piece by piece, but I knew the other place was not temporary, and I needed to learn what version of our marriage Mallory had been told. After the legal process began moving forward, Mallory contacted Kara because her name had surfaced in questions involving the apartment and the money spent there. She did not come to apologize, and she did not pretend she had known nothing about me. She admitted Grant had told her he was still legally married, but insisted our marriage had been over for a long time and that I had already accepted it. I looked at her and asked, "Did he tell you I knew about you?" Mallory answered, "He told me you knew there was someone else, just not who." I asked one more question because I needed to hear how far Grant had taken the lie. "Did he tell you I was leaving him?" Mallory held my eyes for a moment before saying, "He told me you already had." I told her that less than a week earlier. Grant had sat in our kitchen planning an RV trip with me and talking about the places we would visit together. Mallory went still, then opened her phone and showed me messages where Grant promised he would soon move into the apartment full-time. He had told her he was only waiting for me to settle into a new life that did not exist. For the first time, his 2 versions were sitting in the same room. With me, he was still a husband planning our future. With Mallory, I was already gone. Nothing more than paperwork standing between them. She did not ask me to forgive her, and I did not offer it. Then Mallory showed me something else. Grant had recently started talking about selling furniture from the apartment and possibly moving because of work. But he never once said she would be going with him. Until that moment, she had assumed it was ordinary job pressure. I watched the change in her face as she understood what I had already started to suspect. Grant might not have been choosing between us at all. He had kept me calm with one future and kept Mallory waiting with another, while quietly leaving himself room to walk away from both. The apartment no longer looked like proof that she had won him. It looked like another place where Grant had stored a promise he never intended to keep. The third plan emerged from records Kara was legally entitled to review once the divorce process moved forward. Grant had quietly asked about transferring to a position in another state, but he had never mentioned that possibility to me or Mallory. By itself, that meant little, until it matched the furniture he had started removing from the apartment and his refusal to sign anything longer-term there. Then Kara found a deposit for a short-term rental in another state under Grant's name alone. Beginning near the same time he had promised Mallory he would move in with her. During that same period, he was still talking to me about shopping for an RV in the spring. 3 futures now existed, and Grant had placed himself at the center of every one. With me, he was planning a marriage that would continue on the road. With Mallory, he was preparing to finally live openly beside her. But somewhere else, he had already reserved a place neither of us was supposed to know about. I did not need to invent a theory about hidden fortunes or stolen accounts, because the truth was simpler and harder to excuse. Grant had kept me calm with one promise, kept Mallory waiting with another, and quietly prepared a door that opened for him alone. Kara then turned to the expenses tied to the apartment and the nights Grant had described as work. Some charges came from marital funds. While several reimbursement claims lined up with evenings, Mallory's messages showed he had spent with her. We did not call his employer or accuse him ourselves, because the records had to be verified through the proper process. Once those documents became relevant, the company reviewed Grant's work schedule against the expenses he had submitted. The same man who had relied on 2 women, never comparing their stories, had also relied on no one comparing his personal nights with his professional records. The company suspended Grant from his management position while it reviewed the mismatched reimbursements. He came home carrying none of the easy confidence he had worn at the store, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "What did you do?" I looked at him and understood that even now, his first instinct was to make the consequences sound like something I had created. I did not raise my voice or explain the evidence he should already have understood. I only said, "I finally stopped believing the future you were promising me." The meeting happened in Kara's office because Grant wanted to discuss the separation, the apartment, and the money tied to both. Mallory came separately because some of her messages and housing records were directly connected to what had already surfaced. When Grant walked in and saw both of us there, he stopped before reaching the chair, and for once I watched him search for a version of events he had not prepared. I did not spread papers across the table or give him a speech about what he had done. I simply looked at him and said, "You promised me one future, Mallory another, and then prepared a third place where neither of us existed." Grant shook his head and tried to pull the conversation back under his control. "It wasn't like that. I needed time to figure out what I wanted." I answered, "Then why did every version of your future require one woman to stay ignorant?" He opened his mouth, but Mallory spoke before he could reshape the question. "Were you ever actually moving in with me?" Grant did not answer right away, and the silence gave Mallory more than any explanation could have. I watched her face change as she understood that the apartment had never been proof he had chosen her. It had only been another place where he could keep a promise alive until it became inconvenient. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since the store. "Which one of us were you planning to tell the truth to first?" Grant looked at me, then at Mallory, and still had nothing. Mallory stood and told him, I'll provide whatever records I'm legally required to provide. But I'm done waiting inside a store you change whenever it suits you. She did not apologize to me, and I did not offer forgiveness, because neither of us needed to pretend the past had become simple. I watched her leave, then turned back to Grant and saw what remained when every version had finally been compared. There was no wife still believing in the RV, no woman waiting in the apartment, and no quiet exit left untouched by questions. For the first time since Dennis whispered to me in that store, Grant was alone with the one thing he had spent months avoiding, the truth, without anyone else carrying it for him. Grant lost his management position after the company completed its review and confirmed that several reimbursement claims did not comply with policy. There was no arrest, no public spectacle, and no dramatic collapse overnight. Only the consequences of records that no longer matched the stories he had told. During the divorce, the money used for the apartment and the life he maintained outside our marriage became part of the financial settlement, and Kara made sure I was not left carrying losses Grant had created. Mallory moved out, ended the relationship, and returned to her own life without becoming either my friend or my enemy. Owen disappeared from my story once the company finished its work, exactly as he should have. Months later, I returned to the same home goods store and found Dennis near the service desk. I thanked him for stopping me that afternoon, and he only shrugged before saying, "I didn't know what he was hiding. I just knew you deserved to know where he really went." I left the store without looking toward the employee hallway, because by then I no longer needed to see the door that had opened everything. I had already walked through a different one. I moved into a smaller home, kept working, and slowly built a life that no longer required me to wonder whether a phone was face up or face down. Much later, I met someone new, and what mattered most was not some grand promise, but the quiet relief of never having to question which version of the future I was being given. Grant once asked for just a few minutes, believing he could step away and return to the same wife waiting beside the cart. He had no idea those minutes would be enough for one stranger to tell me the truth, for one lie to crack open, and for every future he promised 3 different people to finally collapse into what was real. I did not lose the future Grant had offered me, because that future had never existed. Thank you for staying with me through the moment that changed everything. Tell me where you're watching from and what you would have done after that first whisper in the store. Subscribe and stay close, because sometimes the smallest truth arrives quietly. Then it changes the direction of an entire life.